Hey guys, tonight we're venturing into the untamed American wilderness of the 1800s, where survival wasn't just a skill. It was an art form, mastered by some of the toughest men who ever lived. We're talking about the mountain men, those legendary figures who carved out lives in places where nature showed no mercy and every mistake could be your last. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe if you enjoy calm, long-form stories like this one. And in the comments, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always heartwarming to see how these quiet stories of history bring people together from all around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're going back to a time when building a cabin wasn't about calling a contractor or picking up supplies at the hardware store. It was about looking at a forest and seeing your future home, then making it happen with nothing but an axe, raw determination, and knowledge passed down through generations of men who refused to let the wilderness win. Picture this. It's 1834, and you're standing in a valley somewhere in what will one day become Montana. The nearest settlement is 300 miles away. Winter is coming fast, and you have maybe 2 weeks before the first killing frost. Your survival depends entirely on what you can build with your own 2 hands from the materials nature provides. No pressure, right? This is the story of how mountain men, trappers, hunters, and explorers who lived on the very edge of civilization built the cabins that kept them alive through winters that could kill an unprepared man in a single night. These weren't just shelters. They were masterpieces of frontier engineering, built by men who understood that in the wilderness, your home wasn't just where you lived. It was what kept you breathing. Between 1800 and 1850, roughly 20,000 men ventured into the uncharted American wilderness, leaving behind everything they knew for a life that promised freedom, fortune, and more often than not, an early grave. These were the mountain men, a breed apart from the farmers and shopkeepers of settled America. They came from all walks of life. Some were running from the law, others from broken hearts or failed businesses. Many were simply drawn by the call of the wild, the promise of beaver pelts worth their weight in silver, and the chance to live by their own rules in a land where the only law was survival. What united them wasn't their past, but their future, a future they would have to carve out of the wilderness one log at a time. These men learned quickly that the mountains didn't care about your background, your education, or your plans. The wilderness had its own curriculum, and graduation meant living through your first winter. The mountain men who survived weren't necessarily the strongest or the smartest. They were the most adaptable. They learned from Native American tribes, from French-Canadian voyagers, from Mexican vaqueros, and most importantly, from their own mistakes. Every technique they mastered, every skill they developed was paid for in blood, sweat, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from fighting nature for your very existence. Building a cabin was perhaps the most crucial skill a mountain man could possess. It wasn't just about having a roof over your head. It was about creating a fortress against the elements, a workshop for preparing furs, a storehouse for supplies, and sometimes a final refuge when hostile forces threatened. The difference between a well-built cabin and a poorly constructed one was often the difference between life and death. These men developed techniques that were passed down through oral tradition, refined through trial and error, and perfected under the pressure of survival. They built without blueprints, without power tools, without even nails. In many cases, what they had was knowledge, hard-won practical knowledge about wood, weather, and the art of making something permanent in a world that seemed determined to tear everything down. Before a mountain man ever swung an axe, he had to become a detective. The wilderness was full of clues about where to build, and reading them correctly could mean the difference between a cozy winter and a frozen grave. Water was the first consideration. A cabin needed to be near a reliable water source, close enough for convenience, far enough to avoid flooding. Mountain men looked for springs that wouldn't freeze, streams that ran year-round, or at the very least, a location where they could dig a well that wouldn't run dry. They learned to read the landscape, understanding that water flowed downhill and collected in certain areas, creating microclimates that could support both human life and the game they depended on. But water was just the beginning. The ideal cabin site needed protection from the prevailing winds, especially the brutal north winds that could turn a comfortable home into an icebox. Mountain men looked for natural windbreaks, ridges, rock formations, or dense stands of trees that could shield their homes from the worst weather. Drainage was crucial. A cabin built in a low-lying area might stay warmer, but it would also collect water during spring melts and heavy rains. The smart mountain man looked for a slight elevation, high enough to stay dry, low enough to be protected from wind. The direction the cabin faced mattered enormously. A south-facing cabin would catch the maximum amount of sunlight during the short winter days, helping to warm the interior naturally. An east-facing cabin would catch the morning sun, helping to dispel the bone-chilling cold that settled during long winter nights. Proximity to building materials was another vital consideration. The ideal site would be near a stand of suitable trees, straight, tall pines or firs that could provide logs of uniform size, but it also needed to be near sources of chinking material, moss, clay, or stones that could fill the gaps between logs and keep out the wind. Game trails were important, too. A cabin built near deer paths or elk runs would provide easier hunting, but it also needed to be positioned so that the smell of cooking food and wood smoke wouldn't constantly spook the animals the mountain man depended on for survival. Security couldn't be ignored. The cabin needed good sight lines, the ability to see anyone approaching from a distance. It needed escape routes in case of attack, and it needed to be defensible. Many mountain men built their cabins with their backs to a cliff or large rock formation, eliminating one direction from which enemies could approach. The process of selecting a site could take days or even weeks. A mountain man might scout dozens of potential locations, weighing the advantages and disadvantages of each. He would spend nights in different spots, feeling how the wind moved, observing where the sun rose and set, listening to the sounds of the forest to understand the patterns of wildlife. This wasn't just practical knowledge. It was survival wisdom earned through experience. The mountain men who lived longest were those who took the time to choose their sites carefully, understanding that a few extra days of scouting could save their lives when the temperature dropped to 20 below zero, and the wind was howling like a banshee. A mountain man's toolkit was sparse by necessity. Every ounce of weight mattered when you were traveling hundreds of miles on foot or horseback, but the tools he carried were chosen with the precision of a surgeon selecting instruments, because in the wilderness, the right tool could save your life, and the wrong one could get you killed. The axe was the king of tools, the one item no mountain man could do without. But not just any axe would do. The ideal mountain man's axe had a head weighing between 3 and 4 pounds, heavy enough to bite deep into hardwood, light enough to swing all day without exhausting the user. The handle was typically made from hickory, ash, or another hardwood that could absorb shock without breaking. The axe head itself was a work of art. The best ones were forged by skilled blacksmiths in places like St. Louis or Independence, Missouri, before the mountain men headed west. The steel was folded and hammered to create a blade that would hold an edge through months of hard use. The eye of the axe, the hole where the handle fit, was carefully shaped to ensure a tight, secure fit that wouldn't loosen during use. Mountain men became incredibly skilled with their axes. They could fell a tree with surgical precision, dropping it exactly where they wanted it to fall. They could limb a tree, removing all the branches with swift, accurate strokes. They could hew a log, shaping it from round to square with nothing but axe work. And they could do all of this in conditions that would challenge a modern lumberjack with power tools. The knife was almost as important as the axe. Mountain men typically carried large, heavy knives with blades 8 to 12 inches long. These weren't just weapons. They were multi-purpose tools used for everything from skinning game to carving wooden pegs to splitting kindling. The best knives were made from high-carbon steel that could be sharpened to a razor edge and would hold that edge through heavy use. Many mountain men also carried a smaller knife, sometimes called a patch knife, used for more delicate work. This might be used for carving notches, cutting leather, or preparing food. The handles of these knives were often made from antler, bone, or hardwood, shaped to fit comfortably in the hand during long periods of use. A good saw was invaluable, but not always available. When a mountain man could get one, he preferred a crosscut saw, a long, flexible blade with teeth designed to cut across the grain of wood. These saws could fell trees much more efficiently than an axe, but they were cumbersome, prone to breakage, and challenging to sharpen in remote locations. More frequently, mountain men utilized wedges and a sledgehammer for splitting logs. Wedges, typically constructed from iron and available in various dimensions, were driven into the end grain of a log to cleave it lengthwise, producing boards or smaller pieces for construction. The sledgehammer employed to drive these wedges was usually a straightforward implement, featuring a heavy iron head attached to a wooden handle. For more intricate work, mountain men carried chisels and gouges. These tools were instrumental for carving notches, shaping joins, and creating the precise fittings that distinguished a robust cabin from one vulnerable to collapse in strong winds. The finest chisels were forged from high-quality steel and maintained an edge sharp enough for shaving. A draw knife was another indispensable tool. This comprised a blade with handles at each extremity, used for shaping wood by pulling it towards the user. Mountain men employed draw knives to strip bark, contour logs, and achieve smooth finishes. This technique demanded both skill and practice, but in adept hands, a draw knife could meticulously shape wood. Measuring instruments were rudimentary, yet vital. A mountain man might possess a length of rope or leather marked at specific intervals for determining distances. Some carried collapsible rules fashioned from wood or bone. However, the most significant measuring device was frequently the mountain man's own body. He was intimately familiar with the length of his stride, the span of his arms, and the width of his hand, which served as his standard units of measure. For marking, mountain men resorted to whatever materials were at hand: charcoal from the fire, a fragment of soft stone, or even the tip of a knife to etch lines into wood. Precision was not consistently achievable, nor was it always requisite. A substantial portion of the work was executed by visual estimation and tactile feedback, relying on experience and intuition rather than exact measurements. The condition of these tools was a matter of life and death. A dulled axe was not only inefficient, but also hazardous. A mountain man dedicated considerable time daily to tool upkeep, sharpening blades, tightening handles, and effecting repairs. He carried whetstones, files, and occasionally a small anvil for more extensive repairs. Tool maintenance was frequently conducted by firelight after a demanding day's work. The mountain man would sit by his fire, meticulously honing each blade, inspecting each handle for cracks or looseness, and performing any necessary repairs. This was not merely maintenance. It was a form of meditation, a tranquil period for strategizing the following day's tasks and reflecting on accomplished progress. The bedrock of any mountain man's cabin was its timber, and selecting appropriate trees was an art form that delineated the survivors from those who perished. A mountain man did not merely perceive wood in a tree. He envisioned the future walls of his dwelling and understood that his choices in the forest would dictate whether he endured the winter or became another cautionary tale exchanged around campfires. The favored cabin log originated from coniferous trees such as pine, fir, spruce, or cedar. These species grew erect and tall, possessed relatively few low-lying branches, and offered inherent qualities optimal for construction. Pine was particularly esteemed due to its relative lightness when dry, ease of manipulation with hand tools, and natural resins that conferred resistance to rot and insect damage. However, not all pine trees were suitable for cabin construction. The mountain man sought trees that were mature, but not ancient, typically aged between 50 and 100 years. Younger trees might lack the requisite strength and density for building, while older trees could potentially be decaying internally or be too large to manage with the available limited tools. The ideal cabin log was arrow-straight with minimal taper from base to apex. A tree measuring 2 feet in diameter at its base and still 18 inches at the top, 20 feet up, was considered perfect. Trees exhibiting excessive taper would result in gaps in the cabin walls, posing difficulties in sealing against wind and weather. The pattern of branching was crucial. The most desirable trees for cabin logs displayed branches arranged in regular whorls around the trunk, with extended clear sections between branch clusters. This translated to fewer knots in the finished log and less effort required for removing branch stubs. A tree with branches scattered randomly along its length would yield a log replete with knots, potentially compromising structural integrity and complicating workmanship. The mountain man also scrutinized for signs of disease or insect damage. A tree marked with woodpecker holes could indicate insect infestation. Fungal growths, unusual swellings, or areas where bark was absent or discolored might signify internal rot. A tree appearing healthy externally could be hollow within, rendering it unsuitable for construction. The timing of tree felling was of immense significance. The optimal period was late autumn or winter, when sap levels were low and the wood possessed its lowest moisture content. Trees harvested in spring or early summer would be saturated with sap, making them considerably heavier to work with and more susceptible to checking and splitting during drying. Once suitable trees were identified, the felling process demanded both expertise and fortitude. A mountain man typically operated solo, necessitating absolute certainty regarding the trajectory of each falling tree. An error could result in a tree impacting the cabin site, other intended timber, or, most perilously, himself. The felling procedure commenced with careful assessment of the tree's natural lean, the distribution of its branches, and prevailing wind direction. The mountain man would clear an escape route, a path he could swiftly take if the tree deviated from its intended fall. He would also clear the area around the tree's base, removing any obstructions that might impede his axe work. The actual felling cut was executed in 2 stages. Initially, a notch was made on the side of the tree facing the desired full direction. This notch, known as the face cut, was typically made to approximately 1/3 the tree's diameter. The angle and depth of this cut precisely determined the tree's landing point. The second cut, termed the back cut, was made on the opposite side of the tree, positioned slightly higher than the base of the face cut. This cut was performed slowly and deliberately, leaving a small section of uncut wood designated as the hinge. The hinge controlled the tree's descent, ensuring it fell in the intended direction. As the back cut progressed, the tree would begin to angle towards the face cut. The mountain man would heed the characteristic creaking and cracking sounds that signaled the tree's imminent fall. At this juncture, he would rapidly retreat along his pre-established escape route, observing the tree's descent and confirming its intended landing. Upon felling, the arduous task of preparing the logs commenced. The branches had to be removed, a process termed limbing. This involved hundreds of individual axe swings, each meticulously placed to detach the branch without marring the trunk. The mountain man worked from the base of the tree upwards, consistently positioned on the uphill side to avoid being struck by tensioned branches. Following limbing, the tree was bucked, sectioned into logs of the requisite length. For cabin construction, logs were typically cut to lengths of 16 to 24 feet, contingent upon the cabin's scale. Each cut had to be perfectly perpendicular to the log's axis to ensure proper end-to-end fitting during assembly. The bark was generally retained on the logs during the initial construction phase. Bark offered some protection against checking and splitting as the log seasoned and could be removed later when time permitted. However, some mountain men opted for immediate bark removal, believing it lessened the likelihood of insect infestation. Generating a sufficient quantity of logs for a cabin was a monumental undertaking. A standard single-room cabin might necessitate 40 to 60 logs, depending on their diameter and wall height. Each log symbolized hours of labor, locating a suitable tree, felling it, limbing it, bucking it to length, and transporting it to the construction site. The physical exertion was immense. A green log measuring 20 feet in length and 18 inches in diameter could weigh well over 1,000 pounds. Moving these logs from their felling location to the cabin site demanded ingenuity, resolve, and often backbreaking labor that would challenge even the most robust individuals. Mountain men devised various methods for maneuvering heavy logs. The simplest approach involved rolling, utilizing a peave or can hook for traction. This proved effective on level or downhill terrain, but was slow and required a clear, unobstructed path. For longer distances or uphill transport, mountain men frequently employed skidding techniques. They might harness a horse or mule to drag the logs, or in the absence of draft animals, they would rely on a combination of levers, rollers, and sheer human strength. Some mountain men became adept at leveraging the land's natural contours, rolling logs into creek beds and floating them downstream to the construction site. The most demanding aspect of log preparation was ensuring uniformity. Cabin logs needed to be of approximately equal diameter to facilitate level, stable walls. This meant the mountain man had to be selective, sometimes discarding perfectly viable trees because they did not match the dimensions of logs already prepared. Ideally, logs were seasoned, allowing them to dry before construction, but time constraints often rendered this impractical. Green logs were considerably heavier and more challenging to work with, but they were also more pliable, allowing for a tighter fit when joined. As the logs dried in place, they would shrink and settle, creating an even more secure bond. The mountain man was also tasked with preparing specialized logs tailored for distinct applications. The sill logs, positioned at the very base and resting directly upon the foundation, were required to be exceptionally straight and robust. Plate logs, which capped the structure and bore the weight of the roof, needed to possess sufficient strength to support the roof's immense load. Corner logs demanded a high degree of straightness and uniformity to ensure that the cabin's corners were perfectly square and inherently stable. While a mountain man's cabin might appear to have been simply placed upon the earth, its construction was in fact a far more intricate undertaking. A well-executed foundation was the decisive factor differentiating a cabin destined to endure for many decades from one that would inevitably sag, decay, and ultimately collapse within a mere few years. The process of laying the foundation commenced long before the first log was even positioned. Site preparation began with the clearing of the designated construction zone. This was not merely a matter of removing trees and undergrowth. It entailed meticulous grading to guarantee adequate drainage and establish a level building surface. The mountain man would clear an area exceeding the cabin's planned footprint. This provided ample working space around the structure and crucially reduced the risk of fire stemming from overhanging branches. Stumps presented a particularly formidable challenge. Merely severing trees at ground level left stumps that would impede construction and, over time, rot, creating soft spots within the foundation. The preferred method involved excavating around each stump, severing its primary roots, and then employing levers along with block and tackle systems to extract the stump entirely from the ground. Once the site was cleared, the mountain man had to delineate the cabin's footprint, the precise outline where the walls would be erected. This was achieved through straightforward yet highly effective surveying techniques. Stakes were driven into the ground at the planned corners of the cabin, and strings were stretched taut between them to mark the lines of the walls. Ensuring that these corners were perfectly square was paramount for the overall structural integrity of the cabin. Mountain men utilized the 3-4-5 method, measuring 3 units along one projected wall line, 4 units along the adjacent wall line, and subsequently adjusting the corner until the diagonal measurement between these 2 points measured exactly 5 units. This ancient geometric principle enabled the creation of perfect right angles without the necessity for sophisticated measuring instruments. The foundation itself assumed several forms, contingent upon local geological conditions and the materials readily available. The most rudimentary foundation consisted of a series of flat stones strategically placed beneath the sill logs. These stones, referred to as piers, elevated the logs clear of the ground, thereby preventing rot and facilitating ventilation beneath the cabin floor. The selection of foundation stones demanded careful consideration of their inherent properties. The ideal foundation stone possessed flat upper and lower surfaces, was sufficiently large to provide stable support, and was composed of a rock type unlikely to fracture or disintegrate under the cabin's weight. Sandstone and limestone were favored when obtainable, whereas granite and other igneous rocks were generally avoided due to their greater propensity to split when subjected to freeze-thaw cycles. The foundation stones had to be meticulously leveled using a water level, a simple apparatus comprising a long tube filled with water. This allowed the mountain man to ensure that all foundation points were situated at precisely the same elevation. This step was critical, as any deviation in foundation height would introduce stress points within the cabin's structure, potentially leading to eventual failure. In regions characterized by rocky soil, the mountain man might excavate shallow trenches and construct stone foundations extending below the frost line. This measure served to counteract frost heaving, the expansion of freezing soil that could lift and displace foundation stones, resulting in an unlevel cabin or even its collapse. In locations where suitable stones were scarce, mountain men sometimes resorted to log foundations. Large, durable logs were positioned directly on the ground and allowed to undergo partial decay, thereby forming a stable base for the cabin. While this method was less desirable due to the eventual need for replacement of the foundation logs, it was occasionally the sole available option. Effective drainage around the foundation was of utmost importance. The mountain man would grade the soil surrounding the cabin site to ensure water flowed away from the structure. This might involve excavating drainage ditches or installing simple French drains, trenches filled with stones designed to channel water away from the foundation. The sill logs, forming the initial layer of the cabin's walls, required specific preparation. These logs would bear the entire weight of the structure and were most susceptible to moisture damage due to their proximity to the ground. The mountain man would designate his straightest, most resilient logs for this critical role, often selecting timber from trees known for their resistance to decay, such as cedar or white oak. Prior to positioning the sill logs, the mountain man would frequently treat them with any available preservatives. Pine tar, if procured, served as an excellent wood preservative. Some mountain men would char the undersides of their sill logs, creating a carbonized layer that deterred rot and insect infestation. The sill logs were then notched to fit securely over the foundation stones, establishing a stable connection between the foundation and the cabin's superstructure. These notches had to be cut with precision. If too shallow, the log risked rolling off the foundation, and if too deep, the log's structural integrity would be compromised. The process of leveling the sill logs was painstaking, demanding constant verification and adjustment. The mountain man would employ wooden shims, thin wedges of wood, to fine-tune the height of individual sections of the sill logs. Once the sills were perfectly level, the foundation work was deemed complete, and the actual construction could commence. The structural integrity and longevity of a mountain man's cabin were largely contingent upon the quality of the joints connecting the logs at the corners. This joining was achieved through notching, which involved cutting precise interlocking cuts that secured the logs without recourse to nails or other metallic fasteners. The art of notching perhaps represented the most specialized skill in cabin construction, demanding accuracy, practical experience, and an intuitive understanding of wood behavior acquired only through years of diligent practice. The most prevalent notching technique employed by mountain men was the saddle notch, alternatively known as the round notch. This method entailed carving a concave depression into the underside of each log, designed to nestle securely onto the log below it. The saddle notch was favored for its relative ease of execution, its creation of a strong and stable joint, and its effective shedding of water, thereby minimizing the potential for rot at the corner connections. The creation of a perfect saddle notch began with meticulous measurement. The mountain man would position the log to be notched atop the log it was destined to join, and then, using a scribe, a compass-like tool with two pointed extremities, he would trace the exact curve required for the cut. One leg of the scribe followed the contour of the lower log, while the other marked the corresponding curve onto the upper log. The subsequent shaping was accomplished using an axe, necessitating hundreds of precise strikes to fashion the smooth, curved depression. The mountain man would initiate the process by making a series of vertical cuts across the marked area, subsequently using the axe to chip away the wood between these cuts. This operation demanded continuous inspection and adjustment to ensure the notch seated perfectly onto the log beneath. A meticulously crafted saddle notch would fit so snugly that the logs could not be separated without deliberately cutting the joint apart. The sheer weight of the upper logs would further compress the joint, forging a connection capable of enduring for decades. The curved profile of the notch further ensured that any moisture entering the joint would drain away rather than accumulating and fostering rot. Some mountain men favored the dovetail notch, a more intricate joint that offered enhanced strength and superior protection against the elements. The dovetail notch involved shaping the end of each log into a tapered form that fitted into a corresponding slot carved into the intersecting log. This joint was considerably more challenging to produce, but created a mechanical interlock that prevented the logs from separating, even if significant wood shrinkage occurred. The full dovetail notch required exceptional proficiency with an axe and chisel. The mountain man had to execute precise angles and smooth surfaces, and any miscalculation could nullify hours of effort. The joint had to be cut slightly tighter than necessary, requiring the logs to be forced together, generating substantial compression that permanently secured the joint. A simpler variation was the half-dovetail notch, which offered many of the advantages of the full dovetail while being somewhat more manageable to create. This joint was cut only on one side of each log end, resulting in a partial mechanical lock that nonetheless provided considerably greater strength than a simple saddle notch. For mountain men possessing less time or the requisite skill for complex notching, the square notch presented a viable compromise between structural robustness and ease of construction. This joint involved cutting square indentations into the logs, yielding a joint that was straightforward to produce but lacked the weather resistance and inherent strength of more complex curved notches. Square notches were more prone to water accumulation and exhibited a greater likelihood of failure should the wood shrink. The lock notch represented another variation, occasionally utilized by mountain men. This joint involved creating a rectangular notch in one log and a corresponding projection on the intersecting log. The projection was slightly oversized relative to the notch, necessitating considerable force to drive the logs together. Once assembled, this joint proved exceptionally strong and resistant to separation. Irrespective of the notching method employed, precision was an indispensable element. A poorly executed notch would invariably result in fissures within the cabin walls, making them difficult to seal against wind and inclement weather. It would also introduce stress concentrations, capable of causing the logs to fracture or the joint to fail under load. The mountain man would meticulously test the fit of each joint numerous times during the cutting process, making minute adjustments until the fit was flawless. This crucial phase could not be expedited. A single misstep could jeopardize hours of diligent preparation. The tools employed for notching, though rudimentary, demanded meticulous maintenance. A keenly honed axe was indispensable for initial shaping, while chisels and gouges facilitated refined fitting. The frontiersman continuously sharpened his implements throughout this process, recognizing that dulled tools not only augmented the labor, but also heightened the probability of errors. Climatic conditions exerted a significant influence on notching work. Frigid weather rendered the timber more rigid and prone to fracturing, thereby increasing the risk of splits. Conversely, sweltering temperatures caused the wood to expand, potentially transforming joints that fit snugly in the morning into overly tight closures by afternoon. Seasoned woodsmen learned to adapt their methods to these environmental factors, modifying their techniques based on prevailing temperature and humidity. The individual characteristics of each log also impacted the notching procedure. Timber with knots proximate to the ends necessitated particular caution to avert splitting. Cylindrically imperfect logs required careful orientation to preempt interference from their curvature with the joint. Freshly felled timber was more amenable to cutting, but was also more susceptible to shrinking and loosening the joints upon drying. With the foundation established and the initial logs expertly notched, the frontiersman confronted one of the most physically demanding phases of cabin construction, erecting the walls. This undertaking demanded not only prodigious physical strength, but also astute planning and precise execution. A solitary error could culminate in injury, compromise timber, or a structure that would never achieve true perpendicularity or levelness. The inaugural layer of logs, the sill logs, represented the linchpin of the entire edifice. These logs had to be impeccably level and square, as every subsequent course would be built upon this foundational platform. Any deviation at this juncture would be exacerbated as the walls ascended, potentially rendering the cabin uninhabitable. The woodsman commenced by meticulously positioning the first sill log upon its foundation stones. Employing a spirit level and wooden wedges, he would meticulously adjust the log until it achieved perfect horizontality. The second sill log was then situated perpendicularly to the first, and the corner notch was meticulously fitted. This sequential process continued until all 4 sill logs were emplaced, forming a rectangular framework that was level, square, and robustly supported. The erection of subsequent courses progressively intensified in difficulty as the walls gained height. A single log, measuring 20 feet in length and 18 inches in diameter, could weigh upwards of 1,000 pounds, and hoisting it to shoulder height or beyond necessitated inventiveness and mechanical advantage. The most prevalent method for raising ponderous logs involved the utilization of skids. These were lengthy straight poles propped against the nascent wall, forming inclined planes. Logs could then be nudged up these ramps utilizing cant hooks, peavies, or rudimentary rope and pulley contraptions. While this approach was time-consuming, it proved relatively secure when performed with due diligence. For exceptionally weighty logs, or when working solo, the frontiersman might resort to a more sophisticated arrangement of levers and fulcrums. By positioning a long lever beneath one extremity of a log and employing a pivot point, he could elevate immense weights with comparatively minor exertion. The log could then be stabilized with chocks while the lever was repositioned for the subsequent lift. Some woodsmen became adept at harnessing the inherent elasticity of wood to assist in log erection. A lengthy, pliant pole could be bent and secured, then utilized as a spring to aid in hoisting heavy timbers. This technique demanded considerable proficiency and experience for safe implementation. The process of raising walls was further complicated by the imperative to preserve the structural integrity of the cabin as it grew. Each log had to be positioned with exacting accuracy to ensure the walls remained plumb and the corners stayed square. The frontiersman would continually verify his work using simple yet effective instruments: a plumb bob to confirm wall verticality and diagonal measurements to ensure corner squareness. As the walls gained elevation, the woodsman had to anticipate openings for doors and windows, which would be fashioned later. He would delineate the positions of these apertures, ensuring that the logs in those areas were placed to facilitate subsequent cutting. Some woodsmen would leave spaces between logs at door and window locations, while others preferred to cut these openings only after the wall construction was complete. The cumulative weight of the logs imposed considerable compression on the lower courses, aiding in the secure interlocking of the notched joints. However, this same compression made the precise positioning of the upper logs increasingly arduous. The frontiersman had to act with haste once a log was in place, as the weight of subsequent timbers would preclude any adjustments. Chinking, the process of filling the interstices between logs, was frequently undertaken concurrently with wall erection, although some woodsmen opted to finalize the entire framework before commencing this task. Early chinking contributed to structural stability and provided a degree of weatherproofing during construction. The materials utilized for chinking varied based on local availability. Clay mingled with grass or moss was commonplace, as was a mixture of mud and animal hair. Certain woodsmen employed thin slivers of wood, referred to as logs, to fill larger gaps, subsequently sealing the remaining spaces with clay or moss. The uppermost course of logs, designated as the plate logs, demanded particular attention. These logs were destined to support the roof structure and had to possess sufficient strength to bear the roof's weight and any potential snow load. The frontiersman would select his finest timber for this purpose and would often notch them to accommodate the roof beams. Wall height was dictated by practical considerations. Elevated walls offered greater interior volume and enhanced protection against snowdrifts, but they also necessitated a larger quantity of timber and more substantial labor for their construction. The majority of woodsmen erected walls ranging from 7 to 8 feet in height, sufficient to afford adequate headroom without incurring undue waste of materials or effort. The process of raising walls constituted an arduous undertaking that could extend over several weeks. The frontiersmen typically labored from dawn until dusk, pausing only when absolutely essential. The physical demands were immense, involving the lifting, rolling, and positioning of logs weighing hundreds of pounds each, all while maintaining the precision requisite for a sound structure. Weather presented a persistent challenge throughout wall construction. Precipitation could render logs slippery and hazardous to handle, while wind could impede the precise placement essential for secure joints. Snow and frigid temperatures further compounded the difficulty of the work. Nevertheless, the frontiersmen often had no recourse but to persevere, regardless of the prevailing conditions. Once the cabin walls attained their full elevation, the frontiersman confronted the formidable task of fashioning a roof capable of shielding him from rain, snow, and wind, while possessing the requisite strength to support substantial snow loads and withstand the vigorous storms that swept across the mountains. The roof was arguably the most critical component of the cabin's weatherproofing system, and its design and construction demanded careful forethought and adept execution. The most prevalent roof configuration employed by woodsmen was the straightforward gable roof. This design featured two sloping surfaces that converged at a ridgeline extending the length of the cabin. Such a design was relatively uncomplicated to erect, effectively shed water and snow, and provided ample interior space. The roof's inclination was typically quite steep, frequently rising 1 foot vertically for every foot of horizontal distance, ensuring that snow would slide off rather than accumulate to perilous levels. The roof's skeletal structure commenced with the ridge beam, a long, straight log extending along the apex of the roof and supporting the upper extremities of the rafters. The selection of a suitable log for the ridge beam was paramount, as it had to possess sufficient strength to support the entire roof framework without succumbing to sag. The frontiersman would choose a log that was straight, sound, and sufficiently substantial to bear the load, typically at least 12 inches in diameter for a cabin measuring 20 feet in length. The installation of the ridge beam constituted one of the most demanding aspects of roof construction. The beam had to be hoisted to the summit of the walls and precisely aligned along the cabin's center line. This was generally accomplished through a combination of ramps, levers, and block and tackle systems. Some woodsmen would erect temporary scaffolding from smaller logs to support the ridge beam during its installation. The rafters, the sloping timbers forming the primary roof structure, were fashioned from straight, robust logs, typically 6 to 8 inches in diameter. Each rafter had to be cut to the exact length and angle required to span from the wall's crest to the ridge beam. The frontiersman would first construct a template rafter, meticulously cutting and fitting it, and then utilize this template to fabricate all subsequent rafters, ensuring uniformity. The lower extremity of each rafter was notched to rest securely upon the plate log atop the wall. This notch, known as a bird's mouth, had to be precisely fashioned to prevent the rafter from slipping or shifting under load. The upper extremity of the rafter was angled to fit snugly against the ridge beam, and the rafters were typically spaced 16 to 24 inches apart along the cabin's length. The placement of the rafters necessitated careful attention to spacing and alignment. The frontiersman would mark the positions of the rafters on both the ridge beam and the plate logs, ensuring the correct placement of each rafter. The rafters had to be installed in pairs, one on each side of the ridge, to maintain the roof's structural equilibrium. Once the rafters were in place, the frontiersman would install purlins, horizontal logs running perpendicular to the rafters and providing additional support for the roof sheathing. Purlins were typically smaller logs, 4 to 6 inches in diameter, and were notched to rest over the rafters. The spacing of the purlins was contingent upon the type of roof covering to be employed. The roofing material varied, dictated by the availability of resources and prevailing environmental conditions. The most prevalent form of ceiling was fashioned from split shingles, also referred to as shakes, derived from cedar, pine, or other suitable wood. These shingles were fashioned by cleaving straight-grained logs with a froe and mallet, yielding thin, flat pieces that could be layered to create a watertight shield. The creation of shingles was a laborious undertaking, demanding considerable expertise. A mountain man would selectively choose logs exhibiting consistent, straight grain, subsequently dividing them into sections approximately 18 inches in length. These sections were then radially split into delicate pieces, each measuring about 1/4 of an inch in thickness. The caliber of the shingles was contingent upon the wood's grain and the artisan's skill in splitting. The placement of shingles necessitated meticulous attention to their overlap and alignment. Each row of shingles required overlapping the row beneath it by at least half its length to guarantee the prevention of water ingress. Typically, the shingles were secured by their inherent weight and the superimposed weight of the subsequent rows. Notwithstanding, some mountain men would employ wooden pegs or even nails when accessible. In regions lacking appropriate wood for shingle production, mountain men resorted to alternative materials for roof covering. The bark from sizable trees, notably birch or elm, could be stripped in large sheets and utilized as roofing. These bark sheets were overlaid similarly to shingles and secured with poles or stones. Sod roofs presented another recourse, particularly in locales where timber was scarce. A sod roof comprised a layer of poles or split logs surmounted by birch bark or other impervious material, topped with a substantial layer of sod. The root systems within the sod would intertwine, forming a living roof that provided excellent insulation, but demanded careful construction to avert leaks. Certain mountain men utilized a combination of materials, constructing roofs that might feature bark as the basal stratum, succeeded by split shingles, and finished with a sod layer for enhanced insulation. These composite roofs were more intricate to erect, but offered superior protection against the elements. The apex of the roof required specific attention to forestall water infiltration. Typically, a mountain man would install a ridge cap, a specifically shaped component of wood or bark designed to cover the junction where the two roof surfaces converged. This ridge cap had to be precisely fitted and firmly affixed to resist dislodgement by wind. Ventilation was a significant consideration in roof design. In the absence of adequate ventilation, moisture emanating from cooking and respiration would condense on the underside of the roof, leading to decay and structural compromise. Mountain men would frequently leave slight apertures at the ridge or fit rudimentary vents to facilitate air circulation. The roof also had to accommodate the chimney, necessitating the creation of an opening and the installation of flashing to preclude water penetration. This was one of the more formidable challenges in roof construction, as the aperture had to be sufficiently capacious for the chimney, yet precisely dimensioned to preserve the roof's structural integrity. Snow load constituted a critical factor in mountainous terrains. The roof had to possess adequate strength to support several feet of snow without succumbing, and possess sufficient pitch to facilitate snow shedding before it accumulated to perilous depths. Mountain men would frequently reinforce the roof structure with supplementary beams or braces in areas anticipated to experience heavy snow accumulation. The ongoing upkeep of the roof was a persistent concern. Shingles could fracture, warp, or be dislodged by storms, necessitating regular replacement. A mountain man would typically maintain a reserve stock of shingles and conduct roof inspections and repairs each spring and fall. The hearth and chimney assembly served as the focal point of a mountain man's dwelling, providing not only thermal warmth, but also the means for food preparation, garment drying, and illumination throughout the protracted winter periods. The construction of a functional and safe fireplace and chimney demanded proficiency in masonry, an understanding of fire dynamics, and access to suitable materials. A poorly constructed fireplace could inundate the cabin with smoke, fail to deliver adequate heat, or even lead to the conflagration of the entire structure. The building of the fireplace commenced with its foundation, which needed to be robust enough to support the mass of the stone or clay edifice. The fireplace foundation was typically erected using large, flat stones arranged in courses and bonded with clay mixed with grass or animal hair. This foundation extended below the frost line to prevent ground heave, and was usually constructed wider than the fireplace itself to provide a stable base. The firebox, the cavity where the fire was actually sustained, represented the most vital component of the fireplace's design. It required sufficient dimensions to accommodate the logs intended for burning, yet not be so expansive as to impede efficient heating. A typical mountain man's firebox measured approximately 3 feet in width, 2 feet in depth, and 2 to 3 feet in height. The interior walls of the firebox were fashioned from flat stones, meticulously fitted together, and mortared with clay. The rear wall was often designed with a subtle forward inclination to radiate heat into the living space, and the side walls were angled slightly inward to concentrate the heat. The floor of the firebox was paved with flat stones capable of withstanding the intense thermal output of the fire. The throat of the fireplace, the aperture connecting the firebox to the chimney, was arguably the most critical dimension within the entire system. If the throat was excessively large, the fireplace would exhibit poor draft, resulting in smoke entering the room. Conversely, if it was too constrictive, the fireplace would fail to draw at all. The optimal throat size was approximately 1/10 the area of the fireplace opening, typically measuring around 8 inches in width and 4 inches in depth for a standardized fireplace. Above the throat, the mountain man would construct a smoke chamber, a pyramidal void designed to decelerate and cool the smoke before its entry into the main chimney flue. The smoke chamber was constructed with inwardly sloping walls that progressively diminished the cross-sectional area from the throat to the chimney flue. The chimney itself was constructed from stones mortared with clay, and it needed to possess sufficient height to generate adequate draft while being robust enough to withstand wind forces and thermal stresses. The interior of the chimney was lined with flat stones to create a smooth surface conducive to unimpeded smoke flow. The cross-sectional area of the chimney flue was typically 1/12 the area of the fireplace opening. Erecting the chimney demanded meticulous precision in maintaining its verticality and ensuring uniform dimensions throughout its height. The mountain man would employ a plumb bob and rudimentary measuring implements to verify the chimney's straightness and the flue's consistent size. Any deviations within the chimney structure could precipitate inadequate draft or perilous backdrafts. The summit of the chimney required special attention to prevent the ingress of rain while ensuring the unhindered egress of smoke. Some mountain men fashioned simple caps from flat stones, while others devised more elaborate designs intended to deflect rain and simultaneously enhance the chimney's draft characteristics. The mortar employed in the construction of fireplaces and chimneys was typically a composite of local clay, sand, grass, or animal hair to augment its strength and resilience. The mountain man would meticulously test various clay deposits to identify one that would harden appropriately and withstand the thermal rigors of repeated heating and cooling cycles. Fire safety was a paramount concern throughout both the construction and operational phases. The fireplace had to be situated at a sufficient distance from combustible materials to preclude accidental ignition, and the chimney had to be constructed in a manner that would prevent it from igniting the roof or walls. Many mountain men would apply a coating of clay to the interior cabin walls in proximity to the fireplace to provide supplementary fire protection. The hearth, the area situated before the fireplace, was typically paved with flat stones and extended several feet into the room to capture stray sparks and establish a secure zone for fire tending. The hearth also functioned as a work surface for cooking and other activities necessitating heat. Culinary facilities were frequently incorporated into the fireplace design. A mountain man might construct an integrated bake oven, a domed chamber adjacent to the main firebox, which could be heated with embers and utilized for baking bread or roasting meat. Pot hooks and cranes were installed to suspend cooking vessels over the fire. Occasionally, a simple grate was integrated into the firebox for the direct cooking of meat over the embers. The damper, a mechanism for regulating airflow through the chimney, was a rarity that few mountain men could afford, though some would fashion rudimentary dampers from flat stones positioned to partially obstruct the fireplace throat. This allowed for enhanced fire control and minimized heat loss when the fireplace was not in active use. The maintenance of the fireplace and chimney was indispensable for safe and efficient operation. The mountain man would routinely clear accumulated ash and soot, inspect mortar joints for fissures, and undertake repairs for any damage that might permit smoke leakage into the cabin or pose a fire hazard. The efficiency of the fireplace system was a constant consideration, as fuel was often scarce and challenging to procure. The mountain man would engage in experimentation with various fire-building techniques, learn to bank fires to retain heat overnight, and develop methodologies for maximizing the heat output from each piece of burned wood. Once the principal structural components of the cabin were finalized, the mountain man dedicated his attention to the intricacies that would transform the structure into a truly habitable abode. Doors and windows were more than mere conveniences. They were essential elements that significantly influenced the cabin's security, resistance to the elements, and internal comfort. The construction of these features required distinct skills and methodologies compared to the robust timber framework of the walls and roof. The door was typically the first opening to be fabricated and finished, as it afforded access to the cabin during the ongoing construction. Its placement was meticulously selected to ensure good observation of the surroundings while offering protection from prevailing winds. Most mountain dwellers situated their doors on the south or east side of their dwellings to capitalize on solar warmth and morning illumination. Creating the doorway demanded careful preparation and precise execution. The mountain man would delineate the door's outline on the completed wall, usually making it approximately 3 feet in width and 6.5 feet in height, sufficient for easy ingress and egress, yet not so large as to compromise the wall's structural integrity. The cutting was accomplished with a saw, if available, or more commonly with an axe and chisel. The task of piercing the log wall was arduous and required caution to prevent logs from splitting beyond the intended aperture. Typically, the mountain man would cut from both sides of the wall, meeting in the center, and would shore up the logs above the opening with temporary supports to avert sagging. Once the opening was cut, the mountain man would install a door frame fashioned from split or hewn lumber. This frame had to be perfectly square and plumb, as any deviation would impede the door's proper closure. The frame was usually tenoned into the logs above and below the opening and secured with wooden pegs or, if iron nails were accessible, with those. The door itself was generally assembled from split planks bound together with wooden battens, horizontal strips attached to the rear of the door to prevent warping or separation of the planks. The planks were typically cut from straight-grained wood and fitted snugly to minimize gaps that could permit cold air infiltration. Hinges presented a challenge, as iron hardware was both costly and difficult to procure. Many mountain men fashioned their own hinges from leather, creating flexible joints that allowed the door to swing while remaining robust enough for daily use. Wooden hinges were another option, though they necessitated greater craftsmanship to construct and were more susceptible to wear. The door latch was ordinarily a straightforward wooden mechanism operable from either side. A wooden bar on the interior could be lifted by pulling a leather thong that passed through a hole in the door. At night, or when the cabin was unoccupied, the thong could be drawn inward, rendering the door impenetrable from the exterior. Windows were more complex to construct than doors, and were frequently omitted entirely from the most basic cabins. When included, windows were typically diminutive, both to curtail heat egress and because glass was exceedingly expensive and problematic to transport. A common window in a mountain man's cabin might measure only 12 inches square. The window opening was made using the same methods as the door opening, but with even greater care to preserve the wall's structural integrity. The window frame was assembled from meticulously fitted wooden components and designed to hold whatever glazing material was at hand. Glass was the preferred glazing, but was seldom available to mountain men. More frequently, windows were covered with oiled paper, thin sheets of mica, or scraped animal hide treated to achieve translucency. These materials admitted some light while barring wind and weather, though they were significantly less durable than glass. Some mountain men opted for shutters instead of glazed windows. These were solid wooden panels that could be opened in favorable weather to allow light and ventilation, then closed during storms or cold spells for protection. Shutters were simpler to construct than glazed windows and more resilient, although they admitted no light when closed. The interior finishing of the cabin was largely dictated by the available time and resources. The most rudimentary cabins featured dirt floors, log walls with minimal chinking, and no ceiling beyond the underside of the roof. However, mountain men intending to occupy their cabins for extended durations often invested considerable effort in interior enhancements. Flooring represented a significant upgrade that many mountain dwellers undertook when time and materials permitted. The simplest floor was constructed from split logs laid flat side up and tightly fitted. These puncheon floors were relatively easy to build, but proved difficult to maintain cleanliness and levelness. Plank floors were superior, but required more labor. The mountain man would split logs into planks, then hew or plane one side smooth. These planks were then laid over floor joists, smaller logs spanning between the sill logs and supporting the floor. The cabin walls could be improved by adding a layer of split logs or planks over the interior surface of the log walls. This chinking not only enhanced the interior's appearance, but also offered superior insulation and weatherproofing. The gaps between the interior planks were sealed with clay, moss, or other materials to eliminate drafts. A ceiling was another improvement that some mountain men added to their cabins. This was typically constructed from split logs or planks laid across ceiling joists, forming a flat surface that could be plastered with clay to improve its aesthetics and fire resistance. The space above the ceiling provided additional insulation and storage capacity. Interior partitions were sometimes incorporated to divide the cabin into distinct rooms, though the majority of mountain men's cabins remained single-room structures. When partitions were erected, they were generally made from split logs or planks and were non-load-bearing. They merely subdivided the space without supporting any structural weight. Furniture was typically built in rather than freestanding, proving more efficient to construct as an integral part of the cabin structure. Bunks were built into the walls, tables were supported by posts driven into the floor, and shelves were fashioned between the wall logs. This integrated furniture was sturdy, space-efficient, and could not be lost or damaged during moves. Storage was a crucial consideration within the confined area of a mountain man's cabin. Every available space was utilized. Areas beneath bunks, spaces between wall logs, and the region above the ceiling if one was installed. The mountain man would construct boxes, shelves, and compartments to organize his belongings and provisions. Illumination was primarily provided by the fireplace. Although some mountain dwellers crafted simple oil lamps from hollowed stones or wood fragments, candles were a luxury few could afford, and windows provided light only during daylight hours. The final details of interior finishing included items such as pegs for hanging clothing and equipment, basic furniture like stools and benches, and any decorative touches the mountain man deemed worthwhile. These details transformed the cabin from a mere shelter into a home. The distinction between a cabin offering comfortable shelter and one barely habitable often hinged on the quality of its insulation and weatherproofing. Mountain men understood that preventing the ingress of wind, moisture, and cold was as vital as having solid walls and a sound roof. The techniques they devised for sealing their cabins were ingenious adaptations to the materials and conditions they encountered. Chinking, the process of filling the spaces between logs, was the most visible aspect of weatherproofing, but also one of the most challenging to execute effectively. The gaps between logs varied in size depending on the precision of the log fit, and these gaps had to be filled with materials that would remain in place, resist the elements, and provide good insulation. The initial step in chinking involved inserting backing material into the larger gaps. This backing, often termed thinking, consisted of slender pieces of wood, flat stones, or even fragments of bark wedged into the gaps to create a foundation for the chinking material. The backing had to be inserted from the interior of the cabin, pushed outward until it was flush with the exterior surface of the logs. The chinking material itself was typically a blend of clay, mud, and organic matter. The clay provided the binding properties, while sand or small stones added strength and reduced shrinkage. Organic components like grass, moss, animal hair, or chopped straw were incorporated to impart tensile strength and prevent cracking. The proportions of the chinking mixture were critical. Excessive clay resulted in significant shrinkage upon drying, leading to cracks that allowed air infiltration. Insufficient clay meant the mixture wouldn't bind properly and would dislodge from the gaps. Through experience, mountain men learned to adjust their mixtures based on locally available materials and weather conditions during application. The application of chinking was a messy, time-consuming task, demanding patience and meticulous attention. The mountain man would work the mixture into the gaps from both sides of the wall, pressing it firmly into place and smoothing the surface to promote water runoff. The chinking had to be applied in layers, allowing each to partially dry before adding the next. Weather conditions considerably influenced chinking work. Hot, dry weather caused the chinking to dry too rapidly, resulting in cracking and poor adhesion. Cold weather prevented the chinking from setting correctly. The ideal conditions were cool and humid, allowing the chinking to dry slowly and cure properly. Maintaining the chinking was an ongoing responsibility. Freeze-thaw cycles, cabin settling, and normal weathering would cause cracks and gaps to reappear. The mountain man would routinely inspect his chinking and undertake repairs as necessary. Recognizing that neglecting this kind of upkeep could render the cabin uninhabitable, some mountain dwellers devised more advanced chinking methods. They would often apply a foundational layer of coarse chinking, followed by a finer mixture that offered an improved aesthetic and enhanced resistance to the elements. Alternatively, if lime was accessible, some would add a final plastering with lime, establishing a robust, long-lasting surface that better withstood weather and wear. Moss proved to be an especially valuable chinking material in regions where it was plentiful. Certain moss varieties possessed natural preservative qualities and would continue to flourish even after being incorporated into the chinking, thus forming a living seal capable of expanding and contracting in sync with the wooden structure. The effective use of moss chinking necessitated meticulous selection of the appropriate species and adherence to proper installation practices. The roof represented another crucial area for weatherproofing. Even the most expertly constructed roofs were prone to developing leaks over time, and it was incumbent upon the mountain man to execute prompt repairs to forestall water damage to the cabin's interior. He would maintain a stock of roofing materials and routinely inspect the roof for any indications of damage. The accumulation of snow posed a specific challenge in mountainous terrains. Not only could heavy snow cause a roof to collapse, but it could also give rise to ice dams, pushing water back beneath the roofing material. The mountain man learned to clear snow from his roof when accumulations reached perilous levels and designed his roof with a sufficient pitch to encourage natural snow shedding. Ventilation presented something of a delicate equilibrium in cabin weatherproofing. The cabin needed to be sufficiently sealed to ward off frigid air, yet it also required a degree of air circulation to avert moisture accumulation and uphold air quality. Excessive ventilation would render the cabin virtually unheatable, while insufficient ventilation would trigger condensation issues that could lead to decay and mold. Many mountain men implemented straightforward ventilation systems by installing adjustable vents near the cabin's apex. These could be opened during clement weather to facilitate airflow and closed during cold spells to conserve warmth. These vents were typically furnished with hinged flaps operable from within the cabin. Floor insulation, though frequently overlooked, was important for both comfort and energy efficiency. Cold air tended to infiltrate through floor gaps, and the earth beneath the cabin would draw heat away from the interior. Some mountain men would pile earth or snow around their cabin foundations to mitigate air infiltration, while others opted to install skirting fashioned from split logs or bark. Interior vapor barriers were not fully comprehended by mountain dwellers, yet some inadvertently established effective moisture control mechanisms. A layer of bark or hide on the interior walls could function as a vapor barrier, preventing moisture from the interior air from permeating the wall structure where it might instigate rot. Caulking around doors and windows was accomplished using whatever materials were at hand. Strips of leather, twisted rope, or even rags served to seal any gaps surrounding these openings. Some mountain men devised more enduring seals by employing pine pitch or other natural adhesives blended with fibrous elements. The paramount importance of proper drainage around the cabin cannot be overstated. Water pooling near the foundation would inevitably find its way into the cabin, causing decay and rendering the interior damp and unhealthy. The mountain man would contour the soil surrounding his cabin to direct water away from the structure and maintain drainage ditches to manage runoff from heavy rains or snowmelt. Weather stripping, although the concept was understood by mountain dwellers, was implemented without access to manufactured materials. They crafted seals for doors and windows using strips of leather, fur, or fabric that would compress upon closing the door or window, thereby creating a barrier against air infiltration. A mountain man's cabin was not a static entity. It was a dynamic system demanding continuous attention and seasonal adaptations to remain habitable throughout the year. The extreme mountain climate necessitated that the cabin be adjusted for different seasons, and routine maintenance was indispensable for preventing minor issues from escalating into major failures. Spring marked the season for assessment and repair. Following a protracted winter characterized by heavy snow loads, freezing temperatures, and persistent use, the cabin inevitably exhibited signs of wear and damage. The mountain man would commence his spring upkeep by meticulously examining every component of the structure, searching for problems requiring immediate rectification. The roof consistently took precedence in spring maintenance. Snow and ice would have placed stress on the structure, and the freeze-thaw cycles of late winter could have caused shingles to split or shift. The mountain man would ascend to his roof to inspect each shingle, replacing any that were damaged and securing any that had become loose. He would also examine the ridge cap and flashing around the chimney for evidence of damage or displacement. Chinking represented another area demanding spring attention. The expansion and contraction induced by temperature fluctuations, coupled with the structural settling of the cabin, would invariably create cracks and gaps in the chinking. The mountain man would carefully survey every joint between logs, both inside and outside the cabin, and rectify any discovered defects. The foundation would be inspected for indications of frost heave or settlement. Foundation stones that had shifted during the winter would require releveling, and any opened gaps would need to be filled. The mountain man would also check the sill logs for signs of rot or insect infestation, as these were the most vulnerable parts of the structure. Spring was also the opportune time to address any structural issues that had emerged over the winter. Logs that had checked or split would need repair or replacement. Door and window frames that had shifted would require adjustment. Any signs of sagging in the roof structure would need to be resolved before they escalated into significant problems. Summer was designated as the season for improvement and preparation. With immediate repairs concluded, the mountain man could then concentrate on upgrades and readying the cabin for the ensuing winter. This was the period for introducing new features, enhancing existing systems, and accumulating materials for future repairs. Firewood harvesting constituted a major summer undertaking. The mountain man needed to cut, split, and stack sufficient wood to last the entire winter, along with a contingency reserve for emergencies. This was a monumental task that could consume weeks. The wood had to be cut to the appropriate length for the fireplace, split to the correct size for efficient combustion, and stacked in a manner that facilitated proper drying while remaining protected from rain. Summer also served as the time to gather and prepare other materials essential for cabin maintenance. Clay for chinking would be excavated and treated. Moss for insulation would be collected and dried. Stones for repairs would be gathered and stockpiled. The mountain man availed himself of favorable weather conditions to prepare everything he might need during the harsh winter months when outdoor labor would be arduous or impossible. Cabin improvements were frequently undertaken during the summer. A new window might be cut and glazed. Interior partitions could be added. The floor might be upgraded from dirt to split logs. These enhancements not only contributed to the cabin's comfort, but also augmented its value and durability. Fall was the season for final preparations and weatherproofing. As the initial frosts loomed, the mountain man would concentrate on ensuring his cabin was ready for another winter. This was the period for concluding repairs, implementing last-minute improvements, and installing winter protection systems. Banking the cabin was a common fall activity. This involved piling earth, leaves, or even snow around the cabin's foundation to provide supplementary insulation and reduce air infiltration. The banking material would be secured by boards or logs and would remain in place throughout the winter. Storm windows and doors were installed if the mountain man possessed them. These were typically unsophisticated wooden shutters that could be closed over windows during severe weather, or additional doors that created an airlock entry system. These temporary installations would be removed in the spring, but offered valuable protection during the winter. The chimney would undergo a thorough cleaning and inspection in the fall. Creosote and soot accumulated over the preceding winter would be removed, and any damage to the chimney structure would be repaired. The mountain man would also review his supply of fire-starting materials and gather tinder and kindling for the winter. Winter maintenance was primarily focused on maintaining operational systems and averting catastrophic failures. The mountain man would routinely clear snow from his roof to prevent dangerous accumulations. He would keep his chimney free of ice and debris. He would monitor his chinking for new cracks and perform emergency repairs as necessary. Ice dams presented a particular concern during winter. These formed when snow on the roof melted and refroze at the eaves, creating a dam that could force water back beneath the roofing material. The mountain man would break up ice dams as they appeared and would occasionally implement temporary heating systems to prevent their formation. Ventilation management was critical during the winter. The cabin had to be kept warm, yet it also required some air circulation to prevent moisture buildup and maintain air quality. The mountain man would adjust his ventilation systems according to weather conditions, opening vents during milder periods and closing them during severe cold. The fireplace demanded constant attention throughout the winter. Regular ash removal was essential for maintaining efficient burning. Each night, the fire needed to be banked properly to ensure an easy restart in the morning. Fuel had to be transported from the woodpile and allowed to dry near the fire before being utilized. During winter storms, emergency repairs were sometimes unavoidable. A shingle dislodged by wind, a crack in the chinking opened by severe cold, or damage from falling branches all demanded prompt attention to avert more significant issues. The mountain man had to be prepared to operate in hazardous conditions to safeguard his dwelling. Seasonal storage was another crucial aspect. Summer items like tools and equipment not required during winter would be placed in protected locations. Winter provisions, such as extra blankets, emergency food supplies, and cold weather apparel, were kept readily accessible. The mountain man also had to adapt his daily routines to seasonal changes. Winter days, being shorter, necessitated planning work around the available daylight. Increased heating demands meant dedicating more time to collecting and preparing fuel. The isolation of winter required having all necessary provisions on hand before the severe weather descended. As mountain men gained experience and spent more time in their wilderness abodes, many devised advanced techniques and innovations exceeding the fundamental shelter requirements. These enhancements showcased both the builders' ingenuity and their profound grasp of the challenges inherent in mountain living. One of the most sophisticated advancements was the construction of multi-room cabins. While a basic mountain man's cabin was typically a single space, those intending to remain in one locale for several years often extended their homes to incorporate distinct areas for various purposes. A common configuration for an expanded cabin might include a primary living area, a separate sleeping quarters, and a dedicated storage room or workshop. Building multi-room cabins called for more sophisticated planning and construction methodologies. The mountain man had to design a structure that would be both stable and weathertight, while also accommodating interior partitions and multiple roof lines. This frequently involved employing more intricate joinery techniques and developing more complex foundation systems. The dovetail corner joint represented one advanced method that some mountain men mastered. This joint, considerably more challenging to cut than the simple saddle notch, offered superior strength and weather resistance. The dovetail joint created a mechanical lock that prevented logs from separating even with significant wood shrinkage, and it channeled water away more effectively than simpler joints. Advanced chinking techniques included the use of lime mortar when it was available. Lime mortar was substantially more durable than chinking based on clay, and provided enhanced weather resistance. Some mountain men became proficient at burning limestone to produce their own lime, a process that demanded considerable knowledge and the appropriate stone type. Sophisticated fireplace designs incorporated features like bake ovens, warming chambers, and improved draft systems. A bake oven was a distinct compartment integrated into the fireplace structure, capable of being heated by coals for baking bread or roasting meat. Warming chambers served as spaces above or beside the fireplace, used for keeping food warm or drying clothes. Some mountain men engineered ingenious heating systems that distributed warmth more effectively throughout their cabins. These might involve heat exchangers that captured waste heat from the chimney or duct systems that conveyed warm air from the fireplace to other cabin sections. Water systems were another area where advanced techniques were occasionally utilized. Certain mountain men excavated wells or devised spring systems to channel water directly to their cabins. Others constructed rudimentary plumbing using hollowed logs or bark tubes to transport water from a source to the dwelling. Insulation techniques evolved beyond basic chinking to encompass more sophisticated arrangements. Some mountain men built double-wall constructions, featuring an inner and outer wall separated by an insulating space filled with moss, leaves, or other insulating materials. This offered considerably better thermal performance compared to single-wall construction. Advanced roofing techniques involved employing multiple layers of various materials to achieve superior weather protection. A sophisticated roof might consist of a base layer of bark, overlaid with split shingles, and capped with a layer of sod for insulation. These composite roofs, though more complex to construct, provided excellent defense against the elements. Certain mountain men developed innovative solutions to specific challenges they encountered. For instance, in regions subjected to heavy snow loads, they might construct roofs with steeper pitches or install snow guards to prevent dangerous avalanches of snow from sliding off. In areas with strong winds, they might devise specialized anchoring systems to secure their roofs against uplift. Ventilation systems became more refined as mountain men recognized the importance of air quality and moisture control. Advanced systems often included multiple independently operable vents, allowing for precise regulation of air circulation. Some mountain men even engineered simple heat recovery systems that pre-warmed incoming fresh air using outgoing stale air. Storage solutions were refined to maximize the use of limited space within mountain cabins. Built-in furniture grew more sophisticated, featuring elements such as fold-down tables, storage compartments integrated into benches, and sleeping areas that could transform into seating during the day. Security features were sometimes incorporated into advanced cabin designs. These might include concealed compartments for valuables, escape routes not obvious to casual observers, or defensive elements like loopholes for observation or protection against intruders. Some mountain men established workshop areas within their cabins, complete with specialized storage for tools and materials. These workshops enabled them to maintain and repair their equipment during the winter months when outdoor tasks were challenging. Advanced lighting systems included reflectors designed to concentrate firelight, oil lamps fashioned from local materials, and even simple lens systems to focus sunlight during the day. While these systems were primitive by contemporary standards, they represented significant enhancements over basic fire-based illumination. Food storage and preservation systems became more advanced as mountain men learned to manage the difficulties of keeping food fresh in a wilderness environment. These might encompass root cellars dug beneath the cabin, smokehouses for preserving meat, or ice houses for maintaining cool temperatures during the summer months. Some mountain men developed systems for collecting and storing rainwater, creating cisterns or other storage arrangements to ensure a reliable water supply during dry spells. These systems necessitated careful design to prevent contamination and freezing. The most sophisticated mountain men's cabins incorporated features that would not have been out of place in settled communities. These might include glass windows, plank floors, plastered walls, and even simple furniture crafted from local resources. While these features demanded considerable time and skill to create, they transformed the cabin from a mere survival shelter into a comfortable dwelling. The vast expanse of the American wilderness presented mountain men with a wide array of conditions. From the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest to the high alpine meadows of the Rocky Mountains. From the arid regions of the Southwest to the harsh winters of the Northern Territories, each locale necessitated specific adaptations in cabin construction techniques. Mountain men became adept at modifying their building methods to suit local conditions and available materials. In the Pacific Northwest, characterized by massive trees and abundant rainfall, mountain men developed methods for working with enormous logs and constructing structures capable of withstanding constant moisture. The Douglas fir and cedar trees of this region could achieve tremendous sizes, yielding logs far larger than those found elsewhere on the continent. Working with these giant logs required different techniques and tools. The mountain man might employ fire to aid in felling the largest trees, burning through the base while controlling the fire to prevent its spread. Once felled, these massive logs were often too large to move intact, so they would be split or hewn into more manageable dimensions before being transported to the building site. The perpetual moisture of the Pacific Northwest posed unique challenges for cabin construction. Rot was a constant threat, leading mountain men in this region to become experts in selecting the most rot-resistant species and treating their logs to prevent decay. Cedar was particularly valued for its inherent resistance to moisture and insects, and many cabins in this area were constructed entirely from cedar logs. The abundant rainfall also made roof design critical. Mountain men in the Pacific Northwest frequently built roofs with very steep pitches for rapid water shedding, and they developed sophisticated gutter and drainage systems to direct water away from their cabins. The roofing materials themselves needed careful selection and installation to prevent leaks in the persistent dampness. In the Rocky Mountains, where extreme cold and heavy snow loads were the primary challenges, mountain men implemented distinct adaptations. The shorter growing season and harsh conditions meant that trees grew more slowly and were generally smaller than those found in more temperate zones. This necessitated different construction techniques that could utilize smaller logs while still producing robust, weather-resistant structures. The extreme cold of high mountain ranges necessitated advanced insulation methods. Inhabitants of these elevated territories frequently erected dwellings featuring robust walls, often constructed from larger timber or employing a double-wall design for enhanced thermal buffering. They also devised more sophisticated chinking techniques, utilizing materials engineered to remain pliable in frigid conditions and resist fracturing or dislodgement when temperatures plunged well below zero. Significant snow accumulation was common in the high mountains, with depths of 10 feet or more not unusual. This demanded roof structures considerably more robust than those required in lesser altitudes. Mountain dwellers learned to construct roofs with steeper pitches and stronger framing systems, frequently incorporating features like snow guards to mitigate the risk of hazardous snowslides from their rooftops. The brief growing season in mountainous areas also impacted the availability of chinking materials. Clay could be frozen for a substantial portion of the year, and organic substances such as moss and grass had a very limited growth period. Mountain inhabitants in these regions learned to gather and store chinking supplies during the short summer months, developing methods to preserve these materials for usability throughout the extended winter. In the arid Southwest, where water was a precious commodity and temperatures fluctuated dramatically in both extremes, mountain men encountered entirely different building predicaments. The scarcity of substantial trees often made traditional log construction unfeasible, compelling the development of alternative building strategies. Adobe construction became prevalent in these locales, with pioneers learning to fashion bricks from local clay and erect walls of sufficient thickness to provide thermal mass for temperature regulation. These adobe edifices were frequently integrated with log elements where suitable timber was accessible, resulting in hybrid structures that capitalized on the advantages of both materials. The pronounced temperature shifts characteristic of desert territories necessitated distinctive approaches to insulation and ventilation. Dwellings had to be engineered to remain cool during the scorching summer heat, while still offering warmth on frigid winter nights. This typically involved incorporating features such as thick walls, limited window openings, and sophisticated ventilation systems adjustable for varying seasons. Water conservation was paramount in arid regions, and mountain folk devised clever methods for capturing and retaining the minimal precipitation that occurred. Roof designs were optimized to direct every droplet of rainwater into storage systems, which required diligent upkeep to prevent contamination and evaporation. In the northern territories, where the growing season was exceptionally short, and winter temperatures could plummet to -50 degrees Fahrenheit, or lower, mountain men grappled with perhaps the most formidable construction challenges on the continent. The permafrost that defined much of this area rendered conventional foundation techniques ineffective, necessitating the invention of alternative approaches. Building on permafrost demanded methods that would avoid disturbing the frozen ground, thereby preventing melt and subsidence. Mountain men learned to construct foundations that distributed the dwelling's weight over a broad area, thus inhibiting heat transfer from the cabin to the permafrost below. This often involved adopting techniques historically employed by indigenous peoples who had been building in these environments for millennia. The extreme cold prevalent in northern regions also demanded superior heating solutions. A single fireplace might prove insufficient for warming a cabin when external temperatures dropped to 40 or 50 degrees below zero. Mountain men in these areas frequently installed multiple heating systems or engineered more efficient fireplace designs capable of extracting greater warmth from their restricted fuel supplies. The truncated summer season in the far north dictated that all construction activities had to be completed within a severely limited time frame. Mountain men learned to prepare materials during the brief summer months and to execute their work with remarkable efficiency to finish their cabins before winter's onset. This often meant compromising on absolute perfection in construction in favor of achieving a weatherproof shelter before the hazardous cold arrived. Coastal regions presented their own distinct obstacles, with salt-laden air, fierce winds, and storm surges creating conditions markedly different from inland locales. Mountain men constructing residences near the coast had to contend with the corrosive impact of salt air on their tools and building supplies, and they had to design structures capable of withstanding the powerful gales emanating from the ocean. The elevated humidity of coastal areas posed different challenges for wood preservation and drying. Timber might take considerably longer to cure in the moist coastal atmosphere, and persistent moisture could foster rot and insect infestations. Mountain men in these regions learned to select wood species inherently resistant to these conditions and develop strategies for safeguarding their structures from the harsh marine environment. Resistance to storms was critical in coastal zones where formidable winds and driving rain could annihilate poorly erected buildings. Mountain men learned to construct dwellings with lower profiles and more robust connections. Moreover, they devised anchoring systems designed to secure their cabins even during the most severe weather events. Each geographical area also offered unique resources that mountain men learned to leverage. In certain locations, natural clay deposits provided excellent material for sealing gaps. Elsewhere, specific types of stone were available for foundations and hearths. Some regions possessed flora yielding natural preservatives or insulating substances. The adaptation to regional circumstances extended beyond mere construction methodologies. It also encompassed learning to work in harmony with local weather patterns, comprehending seasonal variations in material availability, and cultivating relationships with indigenous populations who possessed generational expertise in building within these environments. Mountain men relocating from one territory to another were compelled to essentially remaster their skills, adjusting their techniques to novel conditions and materials. This continuous process of adaptation and learning was a defining characteristic that distinguished successful mountain men from those who did not survive their initial winter in a new locale. The durability of a mountain man's cabin was contingent not solely on the caliber of its initial construction, but also on the ongoing upkeep and attention it received throughout its lifespan. A well-constructed cabin could endure for decades with appropriate maintenance, whereas a neglected structure might become uninhabitable within mere years. Understanding the principles of cabin maintenance and possessing the requisite tools for the task were indispensable skills for any mountain man intending to establish a permanent home in the wilderness. The fundamental assortment of tools for cabin upkeep closely mirrored that employed for construction, albeit with some crucial augmentations. An excellent set of chisels was vital for executing precise repairs on joints and notches. These chisels had to be maintained with exceptional sharpness, as dull implements would tear wood fibers rather than severing them cleanly, resulting in repairs that were weaker and less enduring than the original construction. A draw knife proved invaluable for shaping replacement components and smoothing rough surfaces. This tool, featuring a blade with handles at each extremity, was utilized by pulling it toward the operator to remove thin wood shavings. Mastering the draw knife demanded considerable practice, yet in adept hands, it could shape wood with remarkable accuracy and a polished finish. Boring tools were necessary for creating apertures for pegs, bolts, and other fasteners. The most frequently used boring implement was the auger, a spirally shaped bit turned manually to drill holes in wood. A variety of auger sizes were needed for different applications, and their keenness and proper maintenance were crucial for effective utilization. A high-quality saw was essential for executing precise cuts during repair work. While axes could handle most cutting duties, situations arose where the accuracy of a saw cut was indispensable. Crosscut saws were employed for cutting across the grain of the wood, while rip saws were designed for longitudinal cuts. The maintenance of these saws required specialized files and considerable proficiency. Measuring and marking instruments gained greater importance for maintenance tasks than they had for initial construction. A folding rule, or a marked length of rope, was essential for ensuring that replacement parts were cut to the correct dimensions. A square was necessary for verifying that repairs maintained the structural integrity of the cabin. The mountain man's toolkit also encompassed specialized implements for specific maintenance operations. A caulking iron was used for packing ceiling material into the spaces between logs. A froe and mallet were employed for splitting shingles and other thin wooden pieces. A prying tool, or can hook, was indispensable for maneuvering and positioning heavy logs during substantial repair endeavors. Tool maintenance was a perpetual concern in the wilderness environment. The mountain man had to function as his own blacksmith, sharpening and mending his tools as they dulled or sustained damage. This necessitated a forge, anvil, and the expertise to work with iron and steel. Many mountain men acquired considerable skill in metalworking out of sheer necessity. Sharpening stones were crucial for maintaining cutting edges. Different types of stones were utilized for various stages of sharpening, from coarse stones for mending damaged edges to fine stones for achieving extreme keenness. The mountain man had to understand the properties of diverse stones and how to employ them effectively. The seasonal cycle of maintenance was paramount for the longevity of a cabin. Spring served as the designated period for comprehensive inspections and repairs, allowing for the assessment and rectification of winter-induced damage before it escalated. Summer served as the season for enhancements and readiness for the approaching winter. Autumn was dedicated to final weatherproofing and protective systems. Winter upkeep concentrated on maintaining operational systems and averting calamitous failures. Roof maintenance likely represented the most crucial facet of cabin preservation. A compromised roof could rapidly devastate a cabin's interior and result in structural harm that would be both costly and time-consuming to rectify. The mountain trapper would routinely examine his roof, searching for dislodged or damaged shingles, issues with the flashing around the chimney, and indications of sagging or other structural defects. Replacing compromised shingles necessitated having a stock of substitute materials available. The mountain man typically split surplus shingles during the summer months and kept them in a dry location for ready access during repairs. The proficiency in fitting replacement shingles had to be acquired, as improperly installed, shingles could introduce leaks superior to the initial damage. Ceiling maintenance was a continuous endeavor, demanding unremitting vigilance. The expansion and contraction of the logs, the settling of the edifice, and the weathering of the ceiling material would generate fissures and gaps requiring attention. The mountain man would regularly inspect his log cabin's chinking and sealants, addressing problems promptly upon detection. The materials for gap sealing repairs needed to be prepared and stored for future utilization. Clay required excavation and processing during the summer when it was pliable. Natural substances such as moss and grass needed to be collected and dried. The mountain man would typically prepare an ample supply of sealing material each summer, intended to suffice for the subsequent year. Foundation upkeep involved scrutinizing for subsidence, frost heave, and the degradation of foundation components. Stones that had shifted necessitated re-leveling, and any resulting voids had to be filled. The sill logs, most susceptible to moisture-induced decay, required consistent inspection for signs of rot or insect infestation. Fireplace and chimney maintenance was paramount for both occupant safety and operational effectiveness. Creosote and soot accumulating within the chimney had to be regularly cleared to preclude chimney fires. The mortar joints of the fireplace and chimney needed examination and repair as necessary. The hearth and firebox required upkeep to ensure secure and efficient functioning. Door and window maintenance entailed verifying the smooth operation of hinges and latches, inspecting frames for damage, and confirming the integrity of the weather stripping. Doors and windows that did not seal properly would permit frigid air infiltration, complicating heating efforts and diminishing comfort. The interior of the cabin also mandated recurrent upkeep. Floors needed to be kept clean and level, with damaged planks necessitating replacement. Walls required inspection for damage, and interior chinking demanded consistent maintenance. Built-in furnishings had to be preserved in good condition to remain functional. Pest management constituted a significant element of cabin maintenance. Insects, rodents, and other vermin could inflict substantial harm upon a cabin if left unchecked. The mountain man needed to comprehend the behaviors of indigenous pests and devise strategies to prevent infestations and address issues as they arose. Proactive maintenance consistently proved more advantageous and economical than reactive remedial actions. The mountain man who dedicated time to regularly inspect his cabin and perform minor repairs as needed would possess a structure with a far greater lifespan and requiring less extensive work compared to one who delayed addressing problems until they became severe. Record-keeping, though not a common practice among mountain men, could offer value in tracking maintenance requirements and planning subsequent endeavors. A straightforward log of repairs and enhancements could aid in identifying persistent problems and scheduling seasonal maintenance needs. The expenditure on adequate maintenance was substantial, yet considerably less than the cost of reconstructing a cabin that had been allowed to fall into disrepair. A mountain man who attended to his cabin could anticipate it providing a comfortable refuge for many years, whereas one who neglected maintenance might find himself embarking on a complete rebuild after merely a few seasons. The cabin construction techniques pioneered by mountain men did not vanish with the conclusion of the fur trade and the westward expansion of the frontier. These methods, honed through years of empirical testing under some of Earth's most severe conditions, formed the bedrock for much of the log construction that followed in the American West. The knowledge transmitted from mountain men to settlers, from settlers to homesteaders, eventually evolved into the log home industry prevalent today. The fundamental principles elucidated by mountain men, the significance of appropriate site selection, the techniques for log joinery at corners, and the methods for weatherproofing and insulation remain relevant. Contemporary log home builders still employ many of the same techniques, albeit refined and improved with superior tools and materials. The saddle notch, perfected by countless mountain men working with hand tools, endures as one of the most favored corner joints in log construction. The dovetail joint, which demanded exceptional manual dexterity to execute, is now produced with precision via modern machinery. However, the basic design has remained unaltered since its development by mountain men 2 centuries ago. The comprehension of wood behavior that mountain men acquired out of necessity is now formalized in engineering handbooks and building codes. The understanding of how logs shrink and settle, how to accommodate this movement in designs, and how to construct edifices that maintain tightness and weather resistance as they age, all trace their origins to lessons learned in wilderness cabins. Modern log home builders have access to kiln-dried logs, precision equipment, and engineered fasteners, yet they still confront many of the same challenges as mountain men. Logs still require selection for straightness and quality. Corners must still be cut with precision to achieve tight joints. Gap sealing remains essential for preventing drafts and ensuring weather protection. While the tools have undergone dramatic advancements, the fundamental techniques remain recognizable. Where a mountain man would dedicate hours to shaping a notch with an axe and chisel, a contemporary builder can fashion the identical joint in minutes using a chainsaw and grinder. However, the insight into the joint's functionality and its efficacy is directly derived from the mountain men who perfected these methods. The regional adaptations that mountain men devised in response to local environmental conditions have also informed contemporary construction. The steeply pitched roofs developed for heavy snow accumulation, the robust walls engineered for extreme cold, and the specialized foundations for challenging soil types all have their parallels in modern building practices. Perhaps most critically, the mountain men's approach to problem solving. Their readiness to experiment, adapt, and innovate in response to arduous circumstances continues to influence builders today. The spirit of resourcefulness, of devising inventive solutions to complex issues, and of constructing durable structures capable of withstanding severe conditions, all stem from the mountain men's legacy. The environmental consciousness that mountain men cultivated, their understanding of how structures interact with their natural surroundings, has become increasingly vital in contemporary construction. The principles of passive solar design, natural ventilation, and working in concert with natural forces rather than against them were all grasped and implemented by mountain men long before they were formalized as design tenets. The standards of craftsmanship that mountain men established, driven by the knowledge that their survival depended on the quality of their work, continue to influence builders who take pride in their profession. The meticulous attention to detail, the profound understanding of materials, and the unwavering commitment to constructing lasting edifices all reflect values that were indispensable for survival in the wilderness. The cabins of the mountain men also represent a significant epoch in American architectural history. These structures, erected by individuals with limited formal schooling, utilizing only hand tools and locally sourced materials, display a level of skill and comprehension that rivals the work of formally trained artisans. They embody a distinctively American approach to construction, one that prioritized practicality, resilience, and adaptability to regional circumstances. Numerous cabins built by mountain men have endured to the present day, serving as testaments to the superior quality of their construction and the effectiveness of their techniques. These structures now function as museums and historical landmarks, offering modern visitors an intimate glimpse into the living conditions of the men who pioneered the American West. The preservation of these historic cabins has become a pivotal element in maintaining our connection to this period of American history. Organizations dedicated to historic preservation actively work to sustain and restore mountain men's cabins, ensuring that future generations can draw lessons from these examples of frontier artistry. The techniques developed by mountain men have also left an imprint on construction methods beyond log structures. The understanding of working with natural materials, fabricating robust joints without manufactured fasteners, and erecting edifices that exist in harmony with their environment all find application in contemporary sustainable building practices. The mountain men's principle of resource conservation, born of necessity in an environment where waste could prove fatal, offers valuable insights for modern builders concerned with ecological impact. The utilization of indigenous materials, the reduction of waste, and the construction of resilient structures that require minimal replacement are all principles gaining significant traction in contemporary building. Examining the construction methods of mountain men offers educational value that transcends mere building techniques, providing broader insights into human resilience and inventiveness. These individuals confronted challenges that would likely daunt most people today. Nevertheless, they not only managed to survive, but also erected comfortable dwellings, relying solely on their expertise, capabilities, and resolve. The social dimensions of mountain men's building practices also illuminate the importance of community collaboration and mutual support. While often depicted as solitary figures, the reality was that cabin construction frequently involved neighborly cooperation. The tradition of barn and house raising that became prevalent in rural America has its origins in the mutual assistance extended among mountain men. Furthermore, the economic lessons derived from their building practices remain pertinent. These men possessed a profound understanding of the true cost of construction, accounting not only for monetary expenses, but also for the investment of time, labor, and resources. Their decisions prioritize long-term value over short-term expediency, resulting in structures that offer decades of service with negligible ongoing expenditure. The mountain men's grasp of the connection between shelter and survival holds significant implications for modern emergency preparedness and disaster relief. Their methods for swiftly erecting habitable structures with limited resources could prove invaluable in scenarios where conventional construction approaches are unfeasible. The psychological aspects of establishing a home in the wilderness also offer insights into human nature and the essential role of shelter in maintaining both mental and physical well-being. Mountain men recognized that their cabins served as more than mere protection from the elements. They were symbols of order and civilization amidst a chaotic and perilous environment. The legacy of the mountain men endures through the thousands of individuals who opt to build log homes today, seeking a connection to a simpler lifestyle. While modern log homes often incorporate all the comforts of contemporary living, they still embody the fundamental principles pioneered by the mountain men. The aesthetic appeal of natural materials, the satisfaction of personal creation, and the comfort of a structure built for longevity. The skills honed by these early builders are still imparted today through workshops and educational programs dedicated to traditional construction methods. These initiatives aim to preserve not only the technical know-how, but also the values and attitudes that contributed to the mountain men's success as builders. Students learn not just how to execute specific construction tasks, but also how to adopt a craftsman's mindset and take pride in producing high-quality work. The influence of mountain men's building techniques is evident in the broader shift towards sustainable and environmentally responsible construction. The principles they established, utilizing local materials, minimizing ecological impact, creating durable structures, and working in harmony with natural systems, are foundational to current green building practices. The narrative of the mountain men is ultimately a testament to human resilience in the face of adversity, showcasing ordinary individuals who achieved remarkable feats through skill, determination, and ingenuity. Their cabins stand as enduring symbols of the human spirit, reminding us that with knowledge, tools, and resolve, people can construct homes anywhere on the planet. As we confront contemporary challenges related to housing, sustainability, and environmental stewardship, the lessons learned from the mountain men become increasingly significant. While their techniques may have been developed 2 centuries ago, their principles remain as pertinent today as they were in the untamed wilderness of the 1800s. The mountain men who erected cabins in the American wilderness bequeathed to us more than just historical artifacts. They left a legacy of craftsmanship, ingenuity, and determination that continues to inspire builders and artisans today. Their story serves as a reminder that the most crucial tools for building a home are not found in a hardware store, but reside within the human spirit. Thus we conclude our exploration of the world of mountain men and their extraordinary cabins. These structures, manually built in some of the planet's most demanding environments, represent far more than mere shelter. They symbolize the triumph of human ingenuity over seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The next time you encounter a log cabin, whether a historical site or a modern dwelling, reflect on the mountain men who perfected these building methods. Recall the countless hours of arduous labor, the cleverness required to overcome problems with limited resources, and the sheer will needed to establish a home in the wilderness. Their legacy persists, not only in the structures they erected, but also in the spirit of craftsmanship and self-reliance they embodied. In an era often prioritizing convenience over quality and speed over durability, the mountain men's approach to construction offers timeless wisdom regarding the value of doing things correctly from the outset. These men understood that a home is more than just a sleeping place. It is a bastion against the elements, a functional hub for daily life, and a symbol of human civilization confronting the wild. They built not merely with logs and stone, but with knowledge, skill, and an unwavering conviction that with sufficient determination, any challenge could be surmounted. The cabins they constructed have endured longer than the men who built them, standing as silent evidence of their expertise and dedication. And in their lasting presence, we find inspiration for our own endeavors, whatever they may be. Ultimately, the mountain men's greatest accomplishment was not simply surviving in the wilderness. It was demonstrating that with the appropriate knowledge, the correct instruments, and the suitable mindset, people are capable of establishing a dwelling in any location across the